In 1991, 16 children vanished during a school camping trip in Whitebirch, Minnesota. By morning, every tent was empty. No signs of struggle, no sounds during the night. Just one thing left behind. Their shoes tied together in pairs, hanging from the branches of a black leafless tree in the middle of a frozen lake. There were no footprints in the snow. The ice beneath the tree was unbroken, and not a single body was ever recovered. But what if the children didn't disappear at all? What if the town buried something, and someone far more disturbing? If you're ready to follow the path Whitebirch tried to erase, hit subscribe and take the first step. Because this isn't just a story. It's the last thing they left behind. It started like any other January trip. Friday, the 11th. Snow fell lightly across County Road 7 as the yellow school bus made its way through the pine forest. Inside were 16 7th graders from Whitebirch Junior High, laughing, passing notes, playing with fogged-up windows as the heat sputtered from the bus vents. At the front, Mr. Daniel Calloway, 45, science teacher and part-time amateur historian, stood with a clipboard and a smile too wide for the cold. Beside him, Helen Morse, the quiet, calm assistant teacher with a thick notebook always tucked under her arm. Calloway shouted names for roll call, while the bus rumbled toward Black Hollow Camp. Collins, Jeremy. Here. Teague, Madison. Present. Barker Lee. Here. One by one, 16 voices called out. The last name was Cara Donnelly. She didn't speak, just raised a hand and nodded. The moment passed, but Helen noticed her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying the night before. The driver, Evelyn, said nothing the whole ride. She rarely did. Some of the kids whispered rumors about her, that she once drove a bus into a lake in 1976, that she had no family, that she could hear voices in the trees. No one ever asked her anything directly. The sun was already dipping when they reached Black Hollow Lake. A gray sheet of ice covered the water, cracked in thin spiderwebs near the edge, but solid in the center. The children pointed toward the tree, without needing to be told. It was hard to miss. It stood crooked, its trunk charred black like it had survived fire. No branches on the lower half, just thick, gnarled limbs clawing toward the sky. "Why's it look burned?" asked Madison. "That's the Hollow Watcher," Calloway said cheerfully. "Legend says it watches over anything buried beneath the ice." Jeremy turned to Helen. "I saw it in a dream last week." Before the trip was announced, Helen raised an eyebrow. "The tree?" He nodded slowly. "And the shoes?" Helen opened her notebook and jotted it down, just in case. By nightfall, tents were up. Firewood was stacked. The children sat around a flickering flame, bundled in scarves and wool coats. Calloway stepped forward and clapped his hands. Story time. Groans and chuckles rippled through the group. He told the same tale he told every year about the original one-room schoolhouse that stood near the lake 100 years ago. How, one winter, the school vanished overnight. No sign of demolition, no records of relocation. Just 16 desks left behind, half buried in snow, and the sound of a bell that never stopped ringing. Locals say the classroom never really went away, Calloway said, his voice lowering. They say it just sank into the earth. And sometimes, if you're really quiet, you can still hear the students taking attendance. The fire popped. Someone shrieked. Laughter followed. But Helen noticed Cara clutching her notebook tightly to her chest. Jeremy was scribbling something in the dark, and Madison kept glancing toward the tree, as if waiting for it to move. Helen walked around the camp twice that night before sleeping. Nothing out of place. Snow falling softly. The lake frozen solid. And the tree still. 7:12 a.m. Helen unzipped the main tent to wake the students. The beds were made. The bags were packed. But every single child was gone. No footprints in the snow. No drag marks. No torn fabric. Just 16 tents and silence. She ran to the lake. And then she saw them. The shoes. 16 pairs. Each tied together by the laces, dangling from the tree's upper branches. They weren't frozen. They swayed, softly as if disturbed only moments earlier. Calloway stumbled behind her and fell to his knees. "This can't be real," he muttered. "I checked on them. At 1 a.m. They were there, all of them." Helen's breath turned to vapor as the wind picked up. She stepped out onto the ice, just a few feet, just close enough to see the initials written inside one pair. KD. Cara Donnelly. The investigation was short. Theories were thin. The leading explanation? A collective runaway event. Panic. Misadventure. Suicide pact. No one believed it. Not really. But Whitebirch needed closure. So they picked the one that hurt the least. And moved on. But Helen didn't. She left town 6 months later. And for the next 34 years, on January 11th, she mailed the same letter to the Department of Education. "The lesson isn't over. Ask better questions." No one replied. Until 2025. By early 2025, Black Hollow Lake was little more than a scar in the land. The water had receded year after year, until nothing remained but cracked mud and broken reeds. Most locals avoided it entirely. Some said the place smelled wrong. Others swore electronics glitched when they got too close. Phones freezing, watches stopping. But officially, it was just land undergoing natural restoration. The county approved a development grant that winter to turn the basin into a nature preserve, hiking trails, a visitor center, maybe a small dock. It was meant to heal the space. Instead, it unearthed something no one was ready to see. On March 6th, excavation began. Day 1 passed uneventfully. Just rocks, clay, rotting roots. Day 2 brought frost pockets and dead tree stumps. But Day 3, March 8th, changed everything. At exactly 10:44 a.m., a backhoe struck something solid. Concrete, flat, smooth. At first they thought it was a septic tank from some forgotten structure. But the shape was too perfect. 12 feet long, 8 wide, exactly 8 feet deep. They cleared the surrounding earth. No pipes, no vents, no door, no stairs. Just a cube, buried under 4 feet of sediment. One of the site workers, Miguel Torres, tapped along the wall and noticed a hollow tone near the top. An air pocket. They drilled a small camera hole, threaded in a snake lens. And what the camera revealed left the crew dead silent. Desks. Wooden. Aligned. 16 of them. Each paired with a small chair, aged but intact. Dusty. Undisturbed. Frozen in time. And on top of every desk, a pair of children's shoes. Perfectly placed. Each one facing forward. Laces tied neatly. Soles clean. Not a single cobweb in the room. No sign of rot or decay. No source of light. And yet somehow, it looked as if someone had just stepped out. Miguel dropped the camera. He wasn't the type to scare easily. A former army mechanic, twice deployed, father of 3. But he climbed out of that hole and told his supervisor, "Whatever that room is, it's not from here." News traveled fast. By the next morning, the site was swarming with officials, state archaeologists, structural engineers, and 2 agents from something called the Bureau of Subsurface Events. They sealed the area. But one call went out quietly. Not to any lab. Not to the news. It went to Helen Morse. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Recognized the voice instantly. Sheriff Nora Lane. Nora didn't waste words. They found a room under the lake. Helen froze. 16 desks, Nora continued. And shoes. The drive back to Whitebirch was 6 hours. Helen didn't stop once. Didn't turn on the radio. Didn't cry. She arrived at the site just before sundown. The sun was bleeding out over the ridge, casting red light across the skeletal trees. Nora met her at the perimeter. The 2 women hadn't spoken in over 20 years. Helen barely recognized her. Lines around the mouth. Gray in the hair. Eyes that looked like they'd stopped believing long ago. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. Nora led her to the edge of the pit. A steel ramp had been placed for entry. "Go slow," Nora said. "Air's weird down there." Helen descended in silence. Her footsteps echoed faintly, though the room had no corners for sound to bounce off. She reached the floor and stopped. The air was heavy, like walking into a room mid-exhale, like someone had just left, or was still watching. She turned slowly, taking it in. 16 desks, 4 rows of 4, each one labeled Collins, Teague, Barker, Donnelly. She moved to Cara Donnelly's desk, touched the wood, cold but dry. On top, a pair of red canvas sneakers, faded now, but unmistakable. Helen leaned closer. She could still see the doodles Cara had drawn on the rubber toe caps, little stars and spirals, scratched in with a pen. And then, the smell hit her. Chalk, paper, maple syrup, sweet, almost sickly. She turned toward the front of the room. There was no teacher's desk, but there was a low cabinet, half buried in dust. On it sat an old portable cassette recorder. Black, plastic, batteries still blinking green. It was already running. Helen's hand trembled as she reached out and hit play. At first nothing, just static. Then, a sound, soft, wet, like pages turning underwater. And then a whisper. We stayed quiet. Because you did. Helen dropped the recorder. It clattered on the floor. The sound cut. A low hum rose from beneath the desks, almost like an old radiator warming up. Except the room had no heat. No wires. No power. Just concrete and dust. Helen backed up. And then she saw it. At the back of the room, on the wall behind the last row, a sentence carved deep into the concrete, with uneven strokes. When your lesson ends, remember us. Her breath caught. The recorder clicked, playing again. Another voice this time. Childlike, male. Miss Morse, can we go now? She bolted up the ramp. Above ground, the wind had picked up. The trees were swaying, but no sound came from them. Just motion. Helen turned to Nora, pale and shaking. It's a classroom, she said. It's them. They're still here. Nora nodded once. She'd already seen it, heard it, felt it. She handed Helen a manila folder. Inside were new documents, printed just days ago. A construction drone had taken an aerial photo of the lake bed before digging began, and in the image barely visible, etched into the dirt around the buried structure, was a faint circle. 16 dots, equally spaced, forming a perfect ring. The marks weren't made by shovels. They weren't part of the construction, and they hadn't been there before the dig. Nora pointed at the photo. We think it's attendance. There in the far edge of the room where there had only been carpet and empty space. Helen didn't sleep that night. She sat in the motel chair, fingers clenched around the folder Nora had given her. The photo inside, the 16-point circle burned into the dry earth, wasn't an artifact. It was a message, and she knew exactly who it was for. Beside her, on the desk, the tape recorder sat silent. She hadn't dared play it again, but she couldn't stop staring at it either. Sometime around 3:40 a.m., it clicked. No one touched it. No one pressed anything. It clicked and began to rewind on its own. Then it stopped and played back a voice she hadn't heard in 34 years. Helen, you forgot something. The voice wasn't a child's. It was her own. Sublishek Faust. Morning brought fog. Thick, heavy, unnatural. The air over Whitebirch carried a smell of ash and old paper. Nora met Helen outside the site perimeter with coffee. Neither of them drank. A federal team had arrived overnight. Men in unmarked black trucks. No badges, no names. They wore gloves. Didn't speak much. And they didn't want Helen there anymore. But Nora didn't care. This was her town. Her case. Her dead friends. She walked Helen to the edge of the pit anyway. You need to see this, she said. The workers had removed more soil overnight. What they found wasn't just one classroom. It was 3. Stacked vertically. One on top of the other, like a forgotten school swallowed whole by the earth. The topmost was the room Helen had entered, the one with Kara's desk and the shoes. But beneath it, visible now through the cracking concrete floor, was another room. Not desks, this time. Cots. 16 of them. Metal frames. Thin mattresses. All untouched. And at the center of the room, a projector. On. Humming. But the power? Still disconnected. They hadn't even wired the site yet. Nora handed Helen a tablet. Someone had uploaded still images from the camera they'd lowered into the second room. Each bed had a clipboard resting on the mattress. Every clipboard had the same printed form. Behavioral Adjustment Log, Phase 2. But under name, something was wrong. They weren't the names of the students who vanished. They were older, adult names. People no one recognized, except for one. Helen Morse. Is this a joke? She asked, voice cracking. Nora shook her head. You're not the only one listed. Look at the next slide. Helen swiped. Jeremy Collins, Cara Donnelly, Daniel Calloway, and dozens more. Dates next to each entry. Years stretching from 1992 to 2024. Entries labeled with codes. Voice distortion. Compliant state achieved. Returning subject to intake chamber. Helen couldn't breathe. This isn't just a burial site, she whispered. It's a loop. Nora didn't reply. She pulled something from her coat pocket. A small spiral notebook. Worn, faded, smudged at the edges. I found this in a sealed drawer beside the cassette player, she said. It has your handwriting. Helen flipped to the first page. January 13th, 1991. If they hear you, they come closer. If they see you, they count. If you speak, they answer. If you write, they remember. They always remember. She dropped the book. This isn't possible, she whispered. But she knew it was, because her hand recognized the shape of those words. Her memory didn't, but her bones did. Zone 5. Back in town, things were already shifting. People were reporting strange dreams. One woman said she heard a school bell ringing in her attic at 3:11 a.m., 2 nights in a row. A boy told his mother that a man with no eyes asked him to finish his test. A grocery clerk saw the faces of children blinking across her security monitor, seated at desks that didn't exist. Whitebirch was waking up. And something old was waking with it. Fiesol Moldol. That evening, Nora and Helen returned to the motel. They shut the blinds, turned off the lights, sat in silence. Then Helen finally said it. I think they're trying to come back. Nora rubbed her temples. I think they never left. They replayed the tape. This time, letting it run. It skipped, glitched, crackled. Then, a song. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Distorted, warped, but unmistakable. After the song faded, the voice returned. Childlike, hollow. Attendance is incomplete. Lesson cannot end. Return the missing. Begin again. Then came the sound of a desk scraping across the floor. Wood against concrete. But not from the tape. From the motel room floor. Fidiu and Dokol Tave. Unbabel. Huntamandia Thot. Both women froze. Helen turned slowly toward the corner. There, in the far edge of the room, where there had only been carpet and empty space, was a small wooden school desk. The kind from the 70s. Metal legs, lift-top lid. Seat attached. On the desk sat a pencil. On the pencil, a name. Jeremy. Nora backed away, hand on her holster. She reached toward the desk, and then the pencil rolled off by itself. Thud. Everything went dark. The lights in the motel didn't flicker. They vanished. Not dimmed. Not sputtered. Just gone. And in their place came the silence. Not the silence of a power outage. Not the kind that hums with distant traffic or heater pipes, or the rustle of cheap curtains. This was total. Absolute. As if the entire world had paused. Held its breath. Helen stood perfectly still. Nora's hand was still on her holstered weapon, but now it trembled. She knew instinctively that whatever was in this room didn't care about bullets. The desk remained in the corner, its shape solid in the dark. The pencil that had fallen now rolled back on its own smoothly, slowly into place. And then, a soft tapping sound. Not from the desk, from the mirror. Tap, 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 tap. 3 knocks. Helen turned toward it. In the reflection there was no room. No beds, no suitcases, no Nora. Just rows of desks. Flickering fluorescent lights overhead. Dust suspended in still air. And at the very front of the reflection, where her face should have been, Jeremy Collins. Sitting, staring directly out, but not blinking. His lips didn't move, but the mirror began to fog, and from within it, letters slowly formed. You remember the wrong things. Then his hand raised, pointed downward, as if to say, look again. Submitman Amarais. Yeah. The lights snapped back. The reflection returned to normal. The desk was gone. The pencil was gone. Helen collapsed into the nearest chair, her breath shallow. Nora locked the door, slid a chair under the knob, and pulled every curtain shut. This is spreading, she whispered. Helen nodded. It's leaking out. The next morning, they drove back to the excavation site. The third classroom beneath the cots was now partially exposed. This one didn't have furniture, just writing. Every inch of concrete wall was covered in handwritten phrases, over and over. The bell must ring. Complete the circle. Write your name before they do. We didn't forget. Why did you? In the center of the room stood a single object. A child-sized desk, sealed under glass. Inside the glass cube was a notebook. Small. Blue. Frayed edges. It belonged to Cara Donnelly. How did they know? Because the name was on the inside cover. If found, return to Cara Donnelly, room 3B. The handwriting was shaky, like it had been written in the dark. But something was off. The ink was still wet, and underneath her name, someone had scrawled something new. Recently, messily. She remembers the bell. She remembers all of it. Helen stared at it, her pulse pounding. She was trying to reach me, she whispered. This entire time. Through the notebooks, through the desk, through... She paused. The reflections. Nora turned.
What are you saying?
Helen's hands trembled. I think the children never left because something rewrote them into the walls. They're not dead. They're trapped in the structure of memory itself, and something is forcing them to repeat their final day over and over. Nora stared at her. In a school that doesn't exist? Helen nodded. But it does now, because we're remembering it. And every time we speak their names, every time we open another page or press play on that tape, we're rebuilding it. Nora pulled out her phone, opened her email, scrolled to the drone footage from 2 days ago. She zoomed in on the soil surrounding the classrooms. The 16-point circle had grown. It was now 32. What happens when it completes? She asked. Helen didn't respond. She didn't need to, because she remembered something from the stories she used to tell herself to fall asleep after the disappearance. A phrase that came out of nowhere, that repeated like a broken record in her head. When the last bell rings, we all sit down. Later that night, Helen returned to the motel alone. Nora had gone to retrieve an old cassette deck from her father's attic. Helen needed the silence, but it didn't last. At 11:34 p.m., the TV turned on by itself. White static. No signal. She stood, approached it slowly. The volume rose on its own, until the static began to twist into something deeper. A layered sound, like a whisper recorded on top of another whisper. Then, a single image appeared. A classroom. Empty. Same desks. Same chalkboard. But on the floor, written in red crayon, were 4 words. You are the substitute. Helen staggered back. Behind her, in the reflection of the dark window, she saw herself standing at the front of the classroom. But every desk was full. and every student was staring up at her, eyes wide, smiling, bleeding. Then the TV snapped off, and the motel door creaked open. No one was there, but something was written on the outside with a child's hand. In red marker, "Take attendance." Helen didn't sleep. She tried, laid on her side, closed her eyes, even played classical music from an old YouTube playlist on her phone. But the phrase on the motel door wouldn't leave her mind. "Take attendance." It echoed with the weight of a command, like it hadn't just been written, like it had been assigned. At exactly 3:03 a.m., her phone buzzed. No number, just one word flashing across the screen. Present. She dropped it. The light dimmed instantly, and the static from the TV returned without sound this time. Just images, flickering in monochrome. 16 children, seated at desks, their mouths open, but no words came out. Then, from one corner of the screen, a silhouette stepped into frame. A woman, tall, hair tied back, holding a roll sheet. It was her, Helen, taking attendance. As she watched, the screen zoomed in into Helen's reflected eyes, and in the pupils, something moved. A classroom, underground, rotating, like a box trapped inside a larger box. And every time it turned, more children appeared. Not 16, not any more. Dozens, then hundreds, filling seats that hadn't existed seconds before. And then blackness. The screen shut off. Helen was left alone in the hum of motel silence, until a slow tearing sound rose behind her. Not loud, but undeniable. She turned. The notebook, Kara's notebook, which had been locked in a glass case at the excavation site, now sitting on her nightstand, its pages turning, one by one, without wind, without touch, and on each page, a name, each written in shaky childlike print. Jeremy Collins, Madison Teague, Lee Barker, Kara Donnelly, and dozens more. Names she didn't recognize, some scratched out, some underlined. One page stopped mid-turn. It read, "Substitute, Helen Morse. Status, instructor present. Bell countdown. 2 days." Beneath it, a checklist. 12 names marked with red X's. 4 more, empty boxes. She reached out, touched the paper. It was cold, but beating. Truby Bain. Sunrise over Whitebirch came quietly, too quietly. No birds, no snow melt, just wind, brushing through branches without resistance. At the police station, Nora Lane stared at her monitor. An email had appeared overnight. No sender, no subject. It contained a single video file. She clicked it. Security footage from Whitebirch Elementary. Timestamp, 2:03 a.m. The camera showed an empty classroom. Desks slightly askew. Standard. Then, one by one, the chairs began to turn, as if invisible students were slowly shifting in their seats. And then the desks aligned themselves. Symmetrically. Perfectly. 4 rows of 4. 16. Then in the back row, chair 16 rolled out from the desk and faced the board. And on the smartboard screen, in glowing red text, "Substitute detected." Nora slammed the laptop shut, called Helen. "We have a problem." And later that afternoon, the town experienced a blackout. Not total. Selective. Only schools. Elementary. Middle. High. All electrical systems failed. Lights out. Doors locked. Phones dead. Students trapped inside reported seeing unfamiliar classmates, children in outdated clothes, sitting quietly, refusing to speak. A teacher from the high school claimed she found a desk in her office that hadn't been there before. She opened it, found a pencil etched with the name Barker, Lee. She had no student by that name, and when she looked up, her entire class had disappeared. The fire department broke the door down 10 minutes later. The room was empty, but the desks were warm, and Fias won. Meanwhile, Helen returned to the excavation site. She felt drawn. This time, she didn't ask permission. She climbed down alone. The air was still heavy, but now, thicker. And the third level of the buried school was now fully visible. No desks, no beds, just mirrors. 16 of them, each facing inward, creating an endless tunnel of reflections. No writing, no furniture, just her. Her reflection, 16 times, each slightly different. One smiled too long, one blinked out of sync, one mouthed words she didn't say. And then behind all 16 Helens, a door appeared. Not physically, but in the mirror world, a black door, with no handle, just one word carved into it. Graduation. From behind the mirrors, a voice whispered, "Attendance incomplete. Lesson not learned. The bell must ring. Begin the final test." Helen turned and ran, but the reflection of her did not. Tamari walking. That night, 4,000 homes across Whitebirch received blank report cards in their mail. Each listed one name, Helen Morse. Each card stamped with the same red mark, "In progress," and on the back of every envelope, scribbled in black crayon, "Please return by final bell." Just names, carved deep into the drywall. Helen hadn't eaten in nearly 36 hours. She didn't notice. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that classroom, the mirrors, the door. Graduation! And she knew, without ever having stepped through it, what was on the other side. Not freedom, not closure, but the lesson. The one no one ever passed. The one you didn't leave until someone else took your place. She wasn't the teacher. She was the substitute. And now the role was being finalized. Sanctuary Wayan Homa, Kutkofarbzine, Zukadoval Parking Hour. Across town, children began to report the same dream, the same room, the same desks, the same voice. Take your seat. The lesson has already begun. Parents brushed it off. Too much screen time, weather change, seasonal anxiety. But by midnight, 19 separate 911 calls had come in reporting missing children, all between the ages of 11 and 13. All from homes within a 2-mile radius of the Black Hollow excavation site. All gone without trace. Only one thing remained behind in every room. A pencil, tied with a red string, resting in the middle of the bed, with a name carved on it, each matching a child who vanished in 1991. Jeremy, Madison, Cara, Lee. The circle was growing. Whitebirch was being rewritten. Sequel, Najid Tranero. Helen didn't run. She couldn't. The notebook on her table now opened by itself, pages flipping as if in windless storm. And when it stopped, a new page had appeared. Not paper, glass. She saw her own reflection, blinking. Then a question written across it. If they sat for you, will you sit for them? Her hands moved without her permission. She wrote, "Yes. Subscribe Moro." And then she woke up. But she wasn't in her motel bed. She was at a desk. Wooden, rusted bolts. She was wearing a cardigan she hadn't worn in decades. Her hand gripped a pencil with her name on it. Morse, Helen. Around her, a bell rang. But not once. Not a chime. It rang 5 times. Low, dull, like a church underwater. And then she heard the chairs scrape. One by one, students turned toward her. Faces half lit. Eyes wide, black. Mouths unmoving, silent. But she heard them anyway. Begin the lesson, Miss Morse. Or they will. Behind the rows of desks, another door opened. Cara stepped through, wearing her red canvas sneakers. She didn't smile, didn't blink, but tears streamed down her face. Not of fear, not of pain, of exhaustion. 34 years of waiting, sitting, being forgotten. She opened her mouth, and her voice sounded not like a child, but like 1,000 whispers braided together. We stayed because you stopped asking. You forgot our names. You let the lesson rot. And now, someone must teach. The students nodded in unison. Helen's hands rose. Not on her own. A lesson plan was placed in front of her. The board lit up. White text bled through. Today's objective. What is the cost of forgetting? Dynamite me. Back in the waking world, Nora stood in the middle of the excavation site, now overrun with federal containment vehicles. But it wasn't working. The blackout zones were spreading. The soil around the classrooms was now cracked open. And underneath it, survey teams reported a fourth chamber. Except it wasn't built. It was forming. Right now, in real time. Flesh-like walls, blood-like ink. 16 desks, slowly growing from the concrete floor. They weren't placing furniture. The school was building itself. A child's voice crackled through a technician's walkie-talkie, a device that hadn't worked in hours. Don't be late. Roll call is next. No. That night across the country, people began seeing a notification pop up on their phones. A calendar invite. Attendance required. Location, Whitebirch. Time, final bell. There was no decline button, only accept. Some ignored it. Most didn't. And when they clicked, the screen flickered. And briefly, less than a second, they saw their own face sitting at a desk, eyes hollow, name tag glowing red. Then their phones died. Fiwad. Helen's voice was hoarse. She had been reading aloud for hours, her throat dry, hands cramping. Each word from the lesson plan turned into echoes in the classroom walls. She didn't know who wrote it, didn't remember ever learning the things inside it. But every sentence brought back a memory. Of Kara laughing. Of Jeremy sketching that cursed tree. Of Madison asking if ghosts could live in glass. She remembered everything now. And it hurt. Then one voice rose from the desks. Is it enough? Helen looked up. They were all watching, waiting. Kara stood again. She stepped forward and placed a bell on the desk. A small, old-fashioned school bell. Brass. Cracked. Worn smooth by time. She pointed at it. One ring to leave. One ring to stay. Which will you do? Helen reached out. Her fingers shook. She rang the bell. Once. The lights shattered. The desks emptied. And Helen woke up, on the floor of the motel, alone, bleeding from the ears. But outside her window, the school had returned, physically, standing, full, rebuilt, no longer buried, no longer underground. And from the second floor window, a child was watching her. Helen stood by the window, breath fogging the glass, hand trembling on the sill. The motel room behind her was quiet. But the air wasn't empty. Outside, where before there had only been fog and trees, now stood a school, not a ghost, not a memory. Brick and mortar, glass and steel, 2 stories tall, lights on, windows dark, and in the upper right corner, room 204, a girl stood behind the curtain, watching, not moving. Kara Donnelly, red sneakers. Blue jacket, eyes hollow but burning. She blinked once, and then the bell rang. Not from the building, from inside Helen's head. A sound so loud and ancient it shook her bones, not her ears, like a memory trying to tear itself free.
I'll not waste only.
The town of Whitebirch didn't notice at first. People still went to work. Children walked to school. Traffic lights changed. But time was wrong. A barista looked up from her register to find every customer had vanished. A boy delivered newspapers and saw the same front page on every porch. January 11th, 1991, 16 students vanish at Black Hollow Lake. A man digging in his yard unearthed a Polaroid. 16 children in winter jackets, smiling. And behind them was him, older, wearing clothes from today. He'd never been a teacher. Never worked at a school. But there he was, arms folded, standing in front of the children like he belonged. And someone had written on the back, in red ink, "Attendance, 17. He wasn't even born in 1991. Outside, at the excavation site, Nora stood over the fourth chamber. But the floor was gone. In its place, a pit of mirrors, reflecting each other endlessly. No floor, no walls, just depth. And in each mirrored surface, Nora didn't see herself. She saw her father, young, dressed in a teacher's coat, holding a bell, and behind him rows of students, seated, staring ahead. Kara was among them. So was Jeremy. So was Nora herself, age 13. She fell backward, shouted for the crew. But when they looked in the mirrors, all they saw was Nora and 16 empty desks. The mirrors weren't reflecting reality. They were reading minds, projecting the past, reconstructing trauma, as if the school itself was trying to decide who's next to teach. Faluir, IG, what Nisto. Helen made it to the school by dawn. No doors, just a front entrance already wide open, as if it had been waiting for her. Inside, the hallway stretched too long. Every step echoed with voices long gone. Somewhere, a chalkboard screeched. A pencil snapped. A child giggled. A locker slammed. But she saw no one. Until she reached room 204. She didn't knock. Just entered. And there was Kara, seated at a desk. Same red sneakers. Same cold stare. In front of her, a paper. Blank. A pencil sat beside it, still sharp. Helen moved slowly. Kara didn't react. She sat down in the teacher's chair, exhaled. Are you really here? Kara didn't blink. Then her lips moved. I'm always here. Helen's heart thudded. Where is everyone else? Kara's hand twitched. She pointed at the wall behind her. There was no board, no posters, just names carved deep into the drywall. Madison, Lee, Jeremy, Nora, Helen, and dozens more, some crossed out, some still pulsing faintly with red ink. Kara stood, approached Helen slowly. Her voice was barely a breath. You replaced him. Helen stared. Who? Kara leaned in. Her voice cracked through the air like frost-splitting glass. Cullaway. Helen's chest tightened. No, he died. He drowned. They said he never... He taught too long, Kara said. He didn't want to leave, so we helped. She turned. Opened the desk. Inside, a bell, but it was different from before. Cracked down the middle. Leaking red wax. Still vibrating softly, as if recently struck. Kara placed it in Helen's hand. You're next. Then she vanished. Not like a ghost. Not like a dream. She folded inward like a page turning, until there was nothing but the desk, and a notebook inside it. Helen opened the notebook. Inside was a photo. Old. Black and white. 16 children. 2 adults. One was her. But she wasn't smiling. She was teaching. And written on the chalkboard behind her. Do not ring the bell unless you mean it. She dropped the book. The lights blinked out. A voice over the PA system rang through the school. But there were no wires, no electricity. Final bell in 23 hours. All instructors report to your rooms. All students will be returned at the tone. Helen sat in the teacher's chair, frozen. The bell sat in her palm. Heavy, breathing. It vibrated with a low pulse that didn't match any sound she'd ever heard. It was like a heartbeat reversed. And the air around her felt wrong. The room was still room 204. Same floor. Same walls. But something had shifted. The windows no longer showed daylight. Just static. Gray and flickering, like the world outside had been replaced with a broadcast that hadn't finished buffering. She turned her head slowly. Sitting. The student desks were no longer empty. 16 figures sat still. No faces. No movement. Just shadows, dressed in familiar clothes. Jeremy's denim jacket. Madison's puffy red coat, Lee's army green beanie. They weren't ghosts. They were memories with weight. Helen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. But the shadows turned toward her. All at once. "Begin the roll call," they whispered. Not in unison. Not like a chant. Each voice was a different version of her. Softer. Older. Angrier. Colder. She gripped the roster sheet that had appeared on the desk in front of her. Hands trembling. She read the first name. Jeremy Collins. One shadow blinked. A voice echoed. "Present." She exhaled. Madison Teague. Present. One by one, the names continued. All 16. Each answered. Even Kara. But when she reached the last name, one that hadn't been on any previous roster, she froze. Daniel Calloway. No response. She looked up. One desk in the center of the second row sat empty, but smoke rose from it. Thin, black, sweet-smelling like burnt sugar. Suddenly, every other student slammed their fists on their desks. Once, then again, twice. Then a voice boomed through the school, ancient and angry. "The instructor is incomplete." The lights went red. The bell in her hand glowed. And then, a door opened at the front of the room. Foyer. It wasn't connected to any wall. It just hung there, suspended in nothing. On the wood, words scratched deep by fingernails. Where he went. She stepped through. And instantly, the floor vanished.
4, 2, and 9, crop 2.
She was falling. Not fast. Not violently. Just drifting through layers of memory. Old notebooks. Hallway echoes. Laughter looping. The smell of erasers. The sound of lockers slamming. Snow on boots. A hand tugging hers. Kara's hand pulling her toward the buses. But then the snow grew darker. Thicker. It began to whisper. He rang the bell 3 times. He stayed. You followed. Helen landed. Hard. Whoos. She was in a room she'd never seen, but immediately recognized. No windows. No door. Just bookshelves lining every wall. Hundreds of student records. Names. Photos. Grades. Behavior logs. But not on paper. Etched into the walls. As if the building itself was trying to remember every student who ever stepped through. She ran her hand over one. Cara Donnelly. Absent. Another. Jeremy Collins. Present. Then one farther back. Daniel Calloway. Suspended. The word scratched over again and again. Until it read, suspended, suspended, suspended. Suddenly, something scraped behind her. She turned. A figure stood in the dark. Tall. Suit. Tie crooked. Face flickering between familiar and erased like a Polaroid mid-burn. Calloway. But broken. Not in body. In memory. He stepped forward. His voice was layered, polite and thunderous all at once. "You shouldn't be here." Helen took a step back. "Where is this?" she asked. He smiled, mouth twitching unnaturally. "This is where they keep the teachers who taught too long. Who rang the bell out of turn? Who wouldn't stop the lesson?" He pointed behind her. A blackboard appeared where there had been none. And on it, written in blood red, a question. "Who gets to end the class?" Calloway stepped aside, revealing a desk. On it, a test sheet, a number 2 pencil, a name at the top already filled in. Morse Helen. 15 questions, but only one repeated, over and over. "Did you let them leave? Did you let them leave? Did you let them leave?" Helen couldn't breathe. She picked up the pencil, started to write, but the lights flickered again. The walls screamed, and her chair yanked backward on its own. She was being pulled, upward, through layers of wood, stone, time, back through the black door, back into the classroom. The voice at room 204. The bell in her hand had cracked down the middle. The students were gone. Only their names remained on the floor, carved deep. A whisper filled the room. You rang it once. You must ring it again. For them to leave, someone else must stay. The air turned to dust. Helen stood slowly. The bell began to bleed. And across town, every school door unlocked. Simultaneously, no hands touched them. They just opened. The doors of Whitebirch's schools had opened, but no one had touched them. The hinges didn't creak. No alarms were triggered. They simply stood wide and waiting, as if the buildings had exhaled. And from inside each school, students stared out silently, not afraid, not confused, but still, watching, waiting, because class wasn't over yet. In room 204, Helen stood with the bell bleeding in her palm. Her hand was numb, not from cold, from weight, the kind of weight that didn't come from mass, but from memory. She turned toward the desks. They were empty now, but each seat had a shadow. Not full, not formed. Like an echo of a person, made of dust and longing. And from one desk, Kara's a notebook lifted on its own. The pages opened, as if turned by windless fingers. A voice echoed from the walls. One must stay, or all stay forever. The last bell is not for the students. It is for the teacher. Helen dropped the bell. It clanged, cracked further, then silence, until a new sound, a breath, shaky, human, from the door. Calloway, whole, or almost. His skin was paler, eyes sunken, lips colorless, but his voice was still kind. You came back. Helen stepped forward, barely able to speak. You're alive? He shook his head slowly. No, but I'm not dead either. I'm just on break. He chuckled softly. Sounded like glass grinding. They let me leave the lesson once, but only if someone would sub in. He looked at her with guilt, deep and worn. I chose you. Helen's knees buckled. She grabbed the desk for support. I didn't know it would last this long. Calloway interrupted. I thought you'd teach one class, one semester. Then I'd come back. But the class never ends. He turned toward the window. Outside, time was shifting again. Snow falling upward. Children walking backward. A bus stuck in the same loop, turning the same corner, over and over, never arriving. Every time the story is told, the lesson begins again. And every time someone forgets a name, the classroom takes another. He looked at her with sorrow. I never meant to leave you inside. Helen stared at him, tears hot on her cheeks. You didn't just leave me, she said. You left them. Calloway nodded. I know. He turned his palms upward. They were burned, fingerprints melted, cracked, ink-stained. I wrote too many names. And now the school writes itself. Sorrow. Thoughts, then, maybe. The bell on the ground rang once. No one touched it. It rang. Because someone outside remembered. And across Whitebirch, hundreds of people jolted awake, remembering stories they thought they'd imagined, teachers they swore never existed, field trips that were never approved. One mother opened her basement and found a desk at the bottom of the stairs. On it, her own name, etched in chalk. She never went to Whitebirch Junior High, but she sat at that desk when she was 12. She remembered now, because the school wasn't a place. It was a memory that punished forgetting. Back in room 204, Kara appeared again. Not a ghost, not an illusion, fully formed. She sat at her desk, smiled, but not with joy, with relief. Miss Morse, she whispered. I finished my test. She slid a paper across the desk. It had no answers, just a single sentence, written over and over. I was here. I was here. I was here. Helen nodded slowly. You were, she said. Kara stood. So did the others. 16 students, fully visible, real, alive. Calloway took a step back. They're ready, he said. They've completed the lesson. Helen narrowed her eyes. Then let them go. Calloway's face darkened. Only if the bell is rung 3 times. Only if someone stays behind. Forever. He stepped forward. I stayed once. You stayed longer. But now it must be someone new. His gaze shifted past Helen. To someone else.
Good.
The door creaked. And there, standing in the frame, was a young boy. No older than 12. Modern haircut. Smartphone in his hand. Confused eyes. He wore a hoodie that said property of Whitebirch Middle School. Helen's breath caught. This wasn't a ghost. This was someone now. He stared around the room. What is this? He asked. Behind him, the hallway twisted. The school around him wasn't the same as the one he entered. Time had folded again. The school had called him in, and if she didn't act, he'd be next. Helen stood fast. No, she whispered. Not again. She turned to the bell, picked it up. Calloway lunged forward. No. Don't. Helen rang it once. A scream echoed through the walls. She rang it again. Calloway dissolved. Mouth open, eyes wide, form scattering into dust. She looked at Kara, then the other students, and then the boy. She rang the bell a third and final time. The walls cracked. Desks shattered. Lights burst. The classroom collapsed inward, folding like paper burning at the edges. Helen stood alone, then black. She awoke not in room 204, not in the school, not in Whitebirch. She was seated on a bench in a forest. Morning light through trees, snow melting, and across from her, a small empty desk, with no name tag, and a pencil beside it. Then a voice behind her. Ready for the next class? From the door. Helen sat in the forest, on a bench that hadn't existed the moment before. The air was warm. The trees were tall. Snow melted slowly into the roots like time itself was softening. But she didn't trust it. Not anymore. The school had taught her one lesson above all. Nothing is real unless it's remembered. And the moment you forget, even for a second, it writes itself in your place. She stared at the desk in front of her. Small, wooden, clean, the kind used in first-grade classrooms. And beside it, the pencil. Still sharp, still waiting. No name tag, but she felt something in her chest, like a thread pulling inward, tightening. Then the trees around her flickered, like a light bulb on a dying circuit. And for half a second the forest was gone, replaced with mirrors. All 16, then back to trees, and her reflection for just a blink, sitting at the desk, bleeding from the eyes, smiling. Elsewhere, Nora Lane sat in the sheriff's office, eyes locked on a live drone feed. She hadn't slept in over 30 hours. Her hair was tied back, gun holstered loosely, coffee cold. But her stare was sharp. The school was gone. Where it once stood, only an open field remained. But the earth had changed color. Dark gray veins now pulsed faintly through the soil, and survey teams refused to go near. All except one man. A geologist named Harris ventured close before dawn. He carried instruments. He never came back. All they found was his watch, still ticking, set to 7:12 a.m. January 12th, 1991. Nora scrolled through the drone log. A pop-up appeared on the feed. Final bell recorded, 3:11 a.m. Classroom integrity, fractured. Instructor reassigned. She stared. Below that, a list of students, 16 of them, all marked completed. Then one more entry. Just added. New name Matthew Lane. Status, pending. Nora's blood ran cold. Matthew, her nephew, 12 years old. The boy who vanished from room 204. She'd searched every house, street, field in Whitebirch. But he wasn't missing. He was present. And the school had already entered his name on the roster. She grabbed her coat and drove. Vanish Kleiner. Back in the forest, Helen heard footsteps. Soft, crisp, measured. From the left through the trees emerged Matthew, still wearing his school hoodie, still holding his phone, still confused. "Where am I?" he asked. Helen smiled, stood slowly. "You made it out," she said, but her voice cracked, because she knew, you don't make it out of the school. You only delay your return. Matthew sat at the desk instinctively. The pencil rolled toward him. "Do I write something?" he asked. Helen stepped forward. "No." She placed her hand over his. "You remember." He looked up. "What if I don't?" Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Then it writes something for you." Farday. From the sky the world cracked again. Time stuttered. A bird froze mid-flight. A cloud split sideways. The sun blinked. And all across Whitebirch, mirrors began appearing in impossible places. Inside locked cars. Beneath dinner plates. Reflected in the pupils of pets. And most horrifyingly, inside coffins. Each mirror showed a classroom. Each classroom had empty desks. Each desk had a name. One child screamed when she saw her grandfather's name on the board. He died in 1984. She never met him. But now, he sat in the second row, taking notes. Nora reached the clearing. The trees parted naturally. No wind, no force. And there they were. Helen, Matthew, and the desk. She stepped forward. "Helen." Helen turned. "I'm here." "I saw his name," Nora said. "On the list." Helen nodded. "He's next." "No," Nora said, voice hardening. "I won't let that happen." Helen stepped between her and the boy. "You don't get to stop the lesson. You just get to decide who teaches it next." "Summer." Then from behind the trees came the final voice. "I never left." Calloway, whole again, but not real. A projection? A memory? A spirit of the school? It didn't matter. He stepped into the clearing, eyes locked on the boy. "He's ready," he said. Helen shouted. "No, he hasn't written anything. That means it's not final." Calloway smiled. "That's not how memory works." He knelt before Matthew. "Do you remember me?" Matthew hesitated. "I think I've seen you before." Calloway's smile deepened. "That's enough." He raised the bell. It was no longer cracked, no longer bleeding. It was perfect, polished, new. He rang it. Once, the forest darkened. The sun vanished. Helen grabbed Matthew, held him. Nora pulled her gun, fired. The bullet passed through Calloway like fog. "Once more," he whispered. Helen turned to Matthew. "Listen to me. Don't answer when he calls. Don't look at the desk. Don't write your name." Matthew nodded. The bell rang. Twice. Calloway stepped closer. He raised the bell for the third and final time. Helen looked at Nora. "Remember this," she whispered, and stepped forward, took the bell from his hand, and rang it. 3 times. Everything vanished. Helen opened her eyes. She was in room 204. Alone. No students. No desks. Just her. On the board written in perfect white chalk. "You passed." Then everything turned black. And she heard a real bell. Outside. Children laughing. Footsteps in hallways. Wind in trees. And a new name whispered in the air. "Miss Donnelly, will you be taking attendance today?" They didn't bury Helen Morse. There was no body. No obituary. No service. Just silence. People said she retired quietly. Left Whitebirch. Moved somewhere warm. But those who knew better, Nora, the Lane family, the excavation team, never spoke of her again. Because in Whitebirch, silence isn't forgetting. It's protection. Because the school had vanished once more. Not just physically. In records. Archived maps were now blank. Postal records looped. GPS would redirect to a cemetery that didn't exist. And yet, children still dreamed of desks, still drew crooked trees with shoes hanging from their limbs, still hummed songs they had no memory of learning. And some of them, quietly, in bed at night, whispered a name. Kara. She had changed. No longer a shadow. No longer a stuck child frozen in a moment of terror. Now, she was something else. The classroom had accepted her. Not as a student. Not as a ghost. But as the one who stayed. On the blackboard. Her name written in chalk that never faded. Miss Donnelly. Every morning at 7:12 a.m., the classroom appeared. Just for a moment, somewhere in the world. In the corner of a hospital waiting room. Behind the mirror of a school bathroom. In the reflection of a bus window. And always, inside, the same routine. 16 desks. One teacher. And a bell that never needed to ring. Because they all arrived on time. Simchil. Matthew Lane remembered everything. Not at once. But slowly. Drip by drip. A scent. A phrase. A hallway that shouldn't exist inside a middle school, built in 2006. He'd walk to class and see a door with no number. Sometimes it opened. Sometimes it didn't. But one day, he looked through and saw Helen. Just for a moment. Seated. Peaceful. Smiling. A pencil in her hand. Writing something only the classroom could read. And the chalkboard said, "Every student I remember stays free." Fotos with samråd om påbygga beginning would that praised. Nora spent her nights chasing ghosts with folders, trying to rebuild the roster, trying to record what had already been erased. But memory is a battlefield, and Whitebirch was built on surrender. In her dreams she was always late, always arriving after the final bell, always hearing desks slam shut behind her. One night, she dreamt of opening her fridge. Inside, 16 perfectly sharpened pencils, each with a different name. One of them was hers. Frabitz, off Null. The town changed too. People forgot the streets around the old school. Mail trucks circled endlessly. Phone calls failed within 4 blocks of the site. And new parents, people who moved in from other towns, reported that their children said strange things. "We had homework today, but not from this school. There's another bus that comes after dark. My other teacher said I'm doing fine. She said I'll be staying this time." When asked who she was, the children all said the same name. Kara. An Aaron. One child, Mila Bexley, age 11, disappeared from her home in 2026. No sign of entry. No struggle. No note. Except for a crayon drawing she'd left on her pillow. 16 desks. One girl at the front. Red sneakers. Long hair. The caption read, "My new teacher." Mila was never found. But in Kara's classroom a new desk appeared. Right side. 3rd row. A sticker on the back that said "Property of Whitebirch School District." The bell rang once that morning. The sound was soft, but it reached far. Proud in a raw. In an abandoned storage room at the state education office, a man was cataloging forgotten documents. He found a sealed box labeled Black Hollow District, closed. Inside, a single VHS tape, hand-labeled Lesson 34, Instructor Substitution Incomplete. He watched it. What he saw was a classroom. 16 students. One teacher. Helen. Mid-lesson. But her eyes weren't blinking. She didn't breathe. She was being remembered. And the voice narrating the footage calmly, clinically, was Kara's. Each time the cycle completes, one instructor may remain. One student may leave. But only if the roster is never broken. The screen glitched, then faded to black. The man tried to rewind the tape. It was blank. Back in Whitebirch, in the roots of the old lake bed, something grew. The mirror chamber. No longer just reflective. Now a seed. And every child who vanished, every name remembered, was carved into the walls like roots. And in the center, written in charcoal, "You are not lost. You are just next." Dive nigh. Then came the new curriculum. In 2027, schools nationwide received unexpected shipments, textbooks, no publisher, no return address, just boxes labeled Whitebirch Memory Unit, Phase 1. Inside, lessons on obedience, class structures that never existed, histories of school districts that burned down decades ago, and at the end of each chapter, a quiz. Always the same question. If you were given a desk, would you sit? Some children laughed. Some said yes for fun. The ones who answered no woke up the next day with a pencil beside their bed, labeled Reserve. By spring 2027, Cara Donnelly had more students than ever, but none of them came willingly. None of them remembered enrolling. They appeared during moments of silence, a yawn between classes, a pause after recess, a blink too long during a spelling test, and suddenly they were somewhere else. A desk, a pencil, a board, and her. Red sneakers, chalk-stained sleeves, eyes that had once belonged to a scared girl, now glowing with a patient hunger. Cara didn't chase anyone. She simply waited, because they always came. And Yero Tainta. Matthew Lane was the exception. He had been marked, drawn in, even passed through the threshold. But something had changed. Helen's sacrifice had done something. It hadn't broken the cycle, but it had bent it. Now Matthew existed in two places. In his bed at night he was a boy. At school a student. But between blinks, in reflections, in shadows under his locker, he saw the desk. His desk. And Cara sitting across from it. Not angry. Not sad. Just expecting. She never spoke to him again. But sometimes, he'd wake up with chalk dust under his nails. Or find a red shoelace tied around his pencil. Or hear the faint ring of a bell no one else acknowledged. He told no one. Not even Nora. Because Matthew was beginning to understand something Helen never could. You don't beat the classroom by escaping it. You beat it by remembering why you stayed.
What?
Nora Lane, meanwhile, had become an archivist. She left her badge behind, stopped chasing cases, and started chasing memories. Her entire attic now resembled a museum. Missing student reports, tapes from vanished schools, notebooks half erased, photos that changed depending on the time of day. She pinned one above her desk. Cara Donnelly, age 13, red sneakers, frowning. But at night, the photo changed, but slowly, her face smiling, standing at a podium. Behind her, 16 desks, sometimes more, sometimes fewer. The number always fluctuated, as if memory itself was grading attendance. Then came the error. A child from Ohio, Ava Marin, age 12, answered no to the final quiz question in the mysterious Whitebirch textbook. If a desk appeared, would you sit? She wrote, no, and I would run. The next morning, she was gone. The desk was gone, but her mother found something under Ava's bed. 2 desks, folded into each other like origami. One with Ava's name, one with Helen's, but Helen was crossed out, and Ava's name was underlined. A note was taped to the top. We accept transfers. Who not? Cara noticed. In her classroom, a light blinked. A chalkboard flickered. A second board appeared. White, clean, empty, and one word written across it, in fading graphite. Why? No name. No sender. But Cara knew. Because that board didn't belong to her. It belonged to another class. One that was never meant to open again. Calloway's class. Deep beneath the memory chamber, in a place no shovel had ever touched, a new room appeared. It wasn't concrete. It wasn't wood. It was made of sound. Voices, layered endlessly, fused into walls that whispered, breathed, pulsed. Inside, a single chair, and on it, a coat. Old, wool, torn, Calloway's. Above it, on the ceiling, 16 names spun slowly in a circle. All old students. All still present. Except now, next to Kara's, something had changed. Her name blinked.
Status.
Instructor. Status overdue. Status permanent. And beneath it, final evaluation initiated. The classroom had always obeyed rules, even if the rules were memory, pain, repetition. But now it wanted progress. It was writing its own rubric. Towards now, Uncle. Matthew had his first lucid memory that night. He woke up gasping. In his hand, a paper, an essay, typed. Title, Why I Stayed. He hadn't written it, but he recognized every word. I stayed because someone stayed for me. I stayed because leaving means forgetting. And if I forget her, she stays alone forever. So I stay, not because I'm trapped, but because I remember. He folded the paper. It crumbled like ash. Gone. But on his bedroom wall, the chalkboard reappeared. This time, he picked up the chalk. Across the country, reports poured in. Classrooms built over sealed gymnasiums. Desks appearing overnight in hallways. Principals discovering rosters with students from 1991. Bells ringing at 7:12 a.m., even in schools without bell systems. In one school, a child vanished mid-answer during a spelling bee. All that was left? A single letter, still echoing in the auditorium. They never finished the word. But the chalkboard in room 2004 completed it later that night. Present.
Weiterfahren.
Nora stood at the edge of the lake bed again. The air was still. The forest too quiet. She looked down at her notebook, the only record she had that never changed. 16 names. All marked completed. Except one. Cara Donnelly. Her box wasn't empty, but it wasn't checked either. It pulsed. It waited. Nora wrote under it, maybe she isn't stuck. Maybe she's guarding the door. And for the first time, she felt peace. Until she saw the 17th line begin to form below. It started with an M. Whitebirch no longer existed on any map. Not in GPS systems. Not in archives. Not in state records. But somewhere, buried in the folds of dreams, a bell still rang. A desk still sat empty. And someone still raised their hand to write a name on the board. Cara Donnelly had been a teacher for years. But that morning, for the first time, she didn't enter the classroom. She didn't write on the board. She didn't speak a lesson. She didn't wait for the bell. That morning, she simply waited. Because Matthew was standing at the door, and he was holding a notebook. Blank. Nothing written inside. Their eyes met. You don't have to stay today, she said. It's not your turn to write. Matthew stepped closer. Slow, steady. He held the notebook out to her. But someone has to write, right? Cara trembled. For years, she had guarded this classroom, memorized its rules, learned to honor the silence. But for the first time, a student gave her a choice. Cara opened the notebook, and for the first time, she didn't write someone else's name. She wrote her own. Cara Donnelly. Leave approved. The classroom shuddered. The lights dimmed. The board wiped itself clean, and the door creaked open. No one entered. She walked out. Cara, no longer a little girl. No longer a whisper trapped in the walls. She was the first teacher to finish the lesson. Matthew stepped inside, took his seat. Looked around. The room was empty. Just him. And silence. A pencil floated near the board, spinning slowly, waiting. No one told him what to do, so he picked it up and wrote his name, Matthew Lane Present, and the pencil snapped in half. Outside, the wind changed direction. Whitebirch's shadow dissolved. No school remained. No bell echoed. Only a memory. Only a story. Only a name. And maybe, one day, when someone opens a board they've never seen before, they'll remember. There was once a classroom here, and someone was always marked absent. But not that day. Because that day, for the first and final time, everyone was accounted for. But not that day. Because that day, for the first and final time, everyone was accounted for. The end. And now it's your turn. If you had the chance, would you sit at the desk? Or would you ring the bell? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's see who's still present.